Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. Adriana had been hanging frozen tea and dainty silver spoons for over a minute now. From the outside, it might have seemed that the elderly lady was under hypnosis. In part, it was indeed so, for her mind was possessed by sad memories. Betty, you have no idea what a heavy burden loneliness is. And on this day, my nerves are on edge. In the voice of the mistress of the mansion, tears were heard, although in the mise-en-scene itself there was a great deal of feigned emotion. But dramas and tragedies were an indispensable attribute of Adriana's life, and this feature of her character was perfectly studied by Betty, who for almost 30 years managed all the affairs in the house, and now is a companion and mistress. Although the relations between the two women could be called friendly only with a huge stretch, they were bound together like Siamese twins. Betty watched her mistress while a hymn of justice played in her soul. Its fierce melodies, her inner voice sang along. The old witch got what she deserved. And I have no pity for you. But aloud, Betty said the words with a deep sigh. Adriana, my dear Adriana, it's time for you to calm down. Don't tear your heart out. You have to get over it. It's been so many years. The hostess, in a flurry of feelings, again grabbed the spoon, but noticing that the cup was empty, she threw the innocent cutlery, utensils, decorated with women's painting tray. The companion immediately obligingly asked for more tea. Yes, she waved her hand regally. You can only warm it with an ordinary kettle. Electric appliances spoil the water. After this tea, I feel quite sick. Betty went to the kitchen, but she could hear her hostess talking in a low voice in the huge living room. It's been so many years, and I still don't believe it. That's understandable. Any mother in my position would behave the same way, because my heart refuses to believe. Ethan, where are you, my only son? This vivid monologue was clearly intended for an audience, but the layout has long been accustomed to such outbursts of its mistress or friend, or unfortunate friend. A wave of schadenfreude was once again tossed to the surface of the gray day. Cruel words in their content. You got what you deserved. And now, for the rest of your days, you will reap the poisonous harvest sown in Iran of evil. Unlike her mistress Betty, she spoke softly, so she couldn't hear her. Adriana was unaware of her companion's true regard for her person. She was so in love with herself that she was absolutely sure that other people felt the same way about her. When some years ago, she offered her homes to the governor, the position of a friend, she had thought it made the humble woman happy. Of course, she could have refused, and there were many reasons for that. But she had accepted. Perhaps it was out of self-interest, because it paid a companion a solid monthly allowance. Or maybe the reason for consent was the desire to watch with her own eyes and the collapse of the unsinkable Titanic, as the recently deceased retired general called his wife. As a matter of fact, it is a summer house and an apartment in the city, as well as other things. Property inherited Adriana after the death of her husband. Only without consolation widow was not happy about such an inheritance. And Betty, when asking neighbors, they were very interested in the fate of the estate, always answered with restraint. How could I know what the mistress was thinking? I haven't learned to read other people's minds. But curious inhabitants of the Dacha village by old habit tried to avoid the house of the general. That's why nobody dared to have a heart-to-heart talk with her. All the blame was not a fatty in character, but a daughter. Many remember the ugly deed of the woman. Immediately after moving in with their husband in the mansion, the general was given a government dacha for eternal use for merit. But everything was managed by his wife, who was 15 years younger than her spouse. Michael Jackson himself was a cordial man and was not averse to spending free time in good company. He also decided to celebrate the housewarming party with a bang, so he invited almost all of his fellow villagers. But the young wife did not like the feast. In the middle of the party, the woman turned off the music and started yelling at her husband in front of all the people. Michael, what kind of rabble have you gathered here? These people are screaming like crazy. They sing dirty songs, and the child hears it all. Michael tried to stop his wife. Adriana, we sang war songs. It's the great legacy of our fathers. I don't know why they seemed inappropriate to you. Yeah, because the singers weren't in voice, or look who you got the choir from. Couldn't you have picked a different company? Think what your coworkers will say when they find out you're treating them to a drink with a carpenter and a tractor driver. This was a direct insult to those present. The offended villagers began to hurriedly disperse to their homes. Nadeau, with her arms folded on her chest, watched the scene with satisfaction. She had the conscience to accompany the process. You are right to wish the wishes of the guests. Have a good day. If you have time, be sure to come by. The general was ready to fall through the ground in shame. One of the guests was not confused and beat back the hostess unfriendly. And good luck to you, Auntie. You have a protective name that fits your character. Michael was silent at the guest's outburst, and what could he say in defense of his wife? If a man fully revealed the essence of his wife. The man himself sometimes called his wife in his heart. The messengers from Adriana. Though much water has passed since then, Betty remembers the shameful housewarming party. After all, she had been enlisted only days before that momentous occasion. Until then, she had no idea that Adriana was a bitch in the fullest sense of the word. The day after the ingloriously completed housewarming party, New Dumont wanted to quit, but Michael himself asked her to stay. The general's hobby was fishing, and the morning after the unsuccessful party he headed to the river with a simple fishing rod. Betty at that time was putting in order in the outbuilding, where she planned to settle down with her son for the time of her service with the general's couple. I hear you're from around here. Not exactly. I'm from a neighboring village. Your literate speech indicates you're an educated man. What made you agree to such, one might say, not a prestigious job? The woman laughed. Only in her laughter, there was bitterness and despair. You're right on the mark. I'm a bibliographer by training, but nobody needs such specialists today. Times are hard these days, and I have a child, and he needs to be fed and clothed. That's why I was very happy about this job. The man put aside his fishing rod and thoughtfully said, Yes, for the sake of children, we are ready for anything. I would like this parental sacrifice to be justified in the future by worthy deeds of our children. My wife said that you also have a son. Yes, my Sam will go to 5th grade in the fall, and our Ethan is in 7th. I want him to be in the military too. We've got officers on the male side of the family, but my wife is totally against it. She says the military profession is not honored today. I don't understand how one can think like that, but it's useless to prove to my wife simple truths. She's like the Titanic. She's impenetrable. The Titanic only looked like that, but it was a sad story. And Michael looked at Betty in surprise and then exclaimed, You're 100% right. So I've chosen a very poor comparison for my spouse. The man took the rod. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And please don't leave us. She's not always so abrupt. In fact, she's a very vulnerable person. Sometimes you just have to ignore her antics. I've learned that art over the years. Of course, I have no right to demand the same of you, but I'm asking you to stay. There was so much sincerity and even pleading in the tone of this strong-willed man that she changed her mind. The woman looked at her host, who strode briskly toward the river. Have you thought about yourself? Why do such good men get such bad wives? I mean, she's a real girder. Would it be interesting to see her around the general's wives? Does she behave as boorishly in the circle of her own kind? The kettle whistled loudly, followed by Adriana's equally loud shout. Betty, my light, where did you disappear, leaving me alone? You wanted fresh tea. Yes, sorry, it slipped my mind. It's all this life of unsettlement. Betty, deftly maneuvering between antique vases and cabinets, reached the center of the living room with a tray. Here's some fresh tea. Maybe we could eat something substantial. You haven't had breakfast yet today. Betty, how can I think about food on a day like this? The very thought of it is sacrilegious. Exactly 25 years ago, my Ethan disappeared. Adriana is 24 years old. It's been exactly 24 years since the day the men from the military came to you and Michael's house to report Ethan's disappearance. The hostess glared shrilly at her companion, but held back her anger. All the days have been the same to me for a long time, so it's easy to lose count. When Michael was alive, it was easier to bear. When he was gone, I was orphaned. There were sobs. Betty realized she would have to find some convincing words to comfort her. However, every year on September 12, everything went about the same way, so she was ready to comfort the mad widow from morning until evening. But contrary to this expectation, she withdrew her hand. You don't have to comfort me. I know exactly what you're thinking at this very moment. And don't interrupt me. Do you think I deserve this torment? That I'm being punished for my language and my filthy behavior? Silence. Don't say anything now, let me speak, because it is indeed time for me, as Solomon said, to gather stones. Betty froze, for it was the first time in many years that she had seen her mistress in such a state. In the words and behavior of this elderly but still attractive woman, there was not a drop on the games of youth in her eyes with so much pain and despair that the component felt uncomfortable. After all, only a few minutes ago she had wished that the mistresses had hot coals raining down from the sky on her head. For a few seconds, both women were silent, and only in the huge living room the antique clock was counting the running of time. Adriana Foyer lived in an armchair, like a metronome. When the dead are remembered, they always play a metronome. But I don't want to, and I refuse to believe Ethan died. My heart tells me he's alive, and I want to find him. And you're supposed to help me. This statement was so unexpected that Betty almost dropped the expensive tray. Betty, why are you standing there like a statue? The tea must be cold again. Betty had another remarkable characteristic. She could easily change from a formal tone to a traitorous address. It was a sign to the person she was talking to. What was the widow's state of mind? Betty, too, realized how to behave with her hostess. Adriana, if it's in my power, I'm here to help you. And if I had any doubts, I wouldn't be having this conversation today. Of course you can help me, but indirectly. You're talking so strangely today. Nothing strange, Betty. Where does he work? That's right, in the authorities, where everyone knows everything about everyone. But you and I have made a dozen or two inquiries, but we always get the same answer. And I'm not talking about Ethan. Have your Sam run it through his sources. Where do I find Kathy? Doe sipped her tea loudly with a satisfied look. They couldn't recover from her request. You want to find your sister-in-law. What's objectionable about that? It's only natural. After all, Kathy was my son's lawful wife, and I threw her out with an infant in her arms. And now I want to apologize. Yeah, I've been flooded with tears of despair again, thinking I'm a bitch. Maybe you are. But how many times have I behaved for what I did? It just happened that day. I was out of my mind with grief. And then she shows up with that baby, and she's smiling. Betty also remembers the day her mother-in-law kicked the poor girl out the door. But before that, she poured a lot of mud on the young mother's head. After all, her daughter-in-law had given birth a month before the due date, and the baby didn't look like a premature baby. Adriana then in a statement and shouted, "You fucked this baby." And now, claiming it's our grandson, our son is missing. And now you want to pin this man on us. You'll never get away with it. Go back to your village. Where did you come from? Michael tried to calm his wife down, but he wasn't in the best condition either. After the news of his son's death, the man wanted to stand up for his daughter-in-law, but it was sluggish. His wife, however, bought the words about the young daughter-in-law. She jumped out into the street and from the high porch of the mansion began to water Kathy with the last words. Since she was with a child in her arms and a bag with modest belongings, she ran away from the house of her husband's parents. But she was met with insults and accusations of sins she had not committed. Betty looked at the landlady. I don't think Kathy will forgive you. I mean, you've basically ruined her whole life. And why did you bring her up today? I know there's no forgiveness. Would you believe that over the years, I've woken up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat because Ethan's voice whispered to me, "Mom, how could you do this to them? They are my son and your grandson." But my pride prevented me from organizing a search for Kathy before. And then yesterday, just before the damn date, someone told me so clearly to find her again. I don't even know my grandson's name. His name is Michael, after his grandfather. The hostess froze with surprise, and her unblinking gaze began to kindle Betty's forehead. "Betty, and how do you know such details?" "Kathy told me by accident, but that was before you kicked her out. I can't make any promises about helping you find her. You see, I can't order my son around, especially now he lives far away from me. And then I'm not sure Kathy herself would want to see you." Adriana said nothing. She turned her chair to the window and sat there all day watching the clouds floating across the sky. Several times Betty peered into the living room, but the hostess remained in the same unchanged position. It wasn't until it began to get dark that the companion ventured closer to the sleeper, her hands clasping a framed photograph. The picture showed Ethan and Kathy smiling happily. People sometimes don't think about why coincidences happen in life. Some people think that someone invisible in heaven is controlling earthly life to make it a little romantic. This unknown mastermind of the universal show lights the stars. People look at these celestial sparks and make different wishes, but very rarely do these dreams become reality. Kathy, too, had once blindly trusted the stars. Even now, when she knew the bitterness of loss and betrayal, she still hoped that these celestial beacons could bring a miracle. On this September evening, she sat opposite the window and waited for the dark sky to come alive with stars. On the desk among a mountain of unchecked notebooks lay an old photo in a simple frame. The woman gently stroked her hand over the glass, on which 2 tears immediately fell. "Hello, Ethan. How are you? I know you're alive, and I'm sure we'll meet again. It's just not time yet, but I am ready to wait even for eternity, because I love only you alone." Kathy gently wiped the glass again, and just as carefully, she put the picture back. She did not even suspect that there in the distant Moscow suburbs, the mother of her missing husband also at this moment clutched to her chest exactly the same photo. Only that photo is on a more expensive frame. The woman ordered herself only not to write. "It's time to get to work. Otherwise, I'll have to check the essays of my Lomonosov." Kathy did not just love her work. She couldn't breathe without school, and the kids didn't bother her. The fact that she had to carry knowledge to children in this respectful provincial town. The rather modest living conditions did not matter to her. It was not by chance that her son often called her manly Spartans. Michael was proud of his mother, and he was not at all shocked that the boys often laughed at him. When Kathy learned about this, she was at first afraid that the guy may form complexes, but he noticed the change in his mother's behavior and tried to calm her down. "Mom is not worried about me. Everything will be fine." Yeah, a lot of guys tell me I'm a mama's boy, but I don't see anything humiliating about it. I mean, we're all living on this planet. We're all mom's kids. Then Kathy realized that her 13-year-old son had grown up. Only an accomplished man could philosophize so freely. Thinking of her son now, Kathy smiled. Where was he missing about the shower? He promised to call more often, but he doesn't keep his promise. And then there's the military. Kathy moved the stack of notebooks closer and opened the first one she found. Let's see what R. Smith wrote about the meaning of life. Every class has its own leader. William Smith's orders never left the agenda of every board meeting, and his mom was a frequent visitor to the vice principal's office. But despite the restless character, the boy was literate, wrote and loved books, which is generally uncharacteristic of modern youth. The essay of the Perturber of Order was laconic in volume, but rich in content. Most of all, Kathy hit the phrase, "The meaning of life is when you choose your own goal and move towards it." Weak people cannot withstand and turn down halfway. And then they scold everyone, but not themselves. That's why I always take an example from those who are ready for any difficulties. from those who never turn off the path, despite some stylistic mistakes. Kathy gave it an A, such a smart boy, but behavior. She read her students' essays, and it felt like she was reading someone else's mind. And it made her feel uncomfortable inside. More than once, the teacher caught herself thinking that children's essays are a very sensitive structure, especially for teenagers. But unfortunately, even very experienced teachers, sometimes unconsciously, hurt unprotected children's souls with their careless attitude. She remembers how during her internship she was outraged by the ugly act of one class lady who read in front of everyone the essay of a girl who wrote about her innermost dreams. Despite the rules of subordination, the then student called the old teacher destructive to children's souls. She wasn't afraid to speak her mind then. You, the older generation, scold the youth without end, while you yourselves commit low deeds. Children have entrusted you with their deepest dreams, and you just publicly humiliated that girl. It's disgusting. The senior colleagues were astonished by the fiery speech. The trainee, but only the math teacher was willing to stand up for her. She's right. You can't treat children like some formless substance. Every child is an individual who needs to be respected. Kathy cried for a long time afterwards, worrying about a student she didn't know who had been shamed by her old teacher in front of the whole class. She vowed that she would never follow such an example. That incident touched her deeply because she herself had been the victim of adult mistakes many times during her school years. Kathy grew up in a family where everything was built on trust. Her mother worked as a cook in a sanatorium and her father was a driver. Besides her, there were 2 other children in the family. So the parents had to work hard to clothe and feed such a crowd. But they never complained about the fate. On the contrary, they were happy to have a big family. Benjamin was very proud of his children and liked to repeat, "My mother and I are doing our best, and we will nurse our grandchildren. We will create a commune. The girls will do the nightmare. The boys will fish and chop wood." The men laughed at him at work. "Your dreams are primitive." Today, normal people dream of prosperity. They want to travel abroad. You're thinking down to earth. Those who are tied to the land are more adapted to life. I'm sure my children will grow up to be decent people. My father was an old school man, so he believed in justice. But other mores were already prevailing in society. The cult of money was seeping into every aspect of life, and even the school with its traditions could not withstand the onslaught of change. Now powerful parents could dictate their own rules. Kathy and her parents had to face such injustice in the last year of school. A youth forum was to be held in the capital, and the school had to send 3 delegates to the event. Kathy was on her way to a gold medal. She was first on the list. Together with her, 2 more of the best students from the 9th grade were to go to Moscow. The girl began to prepare intensively, and with the help of the class teacher wrote a short report on the work that is carried out in the school. But just a few hours before departure, when the team was already assembled, she was summoned to the director. In the office, in addition to the principal and 2 head teachers, there were still strangers. The principal, blushing and paler, said, "Bracker, unfortunately, you are not going to the forum." Kathy's breath caught, but she clenched her fists to keep from crying. "Why, Bracker? Don't take offense, but you can't delegate the same people from our institution all the time. There are other guys. They may not be stars from the sky, as it's fashionable to say nowadays, but they deserve to represent our school too. And that's what our sponsors think." The principal nodded towards a group of men in expensive suits, and as if on cue, they smiled. But Kathy caught something unpleasant in their smiles. Later in her life, she'd encountered those same smiles more than once. But that first time, for a 16-year-old girl, the cancellation of her trip came as a shock. She ran home in tears, leaving her parents in tears. "I'm not going anywhere." The girl cried all evening, tucked into her pillow. When she recounted her visit to the principal's office, Benjamin was outraged. "And I won't let it go. I will not allow my child's soul to be mutilated." Kathy had never seen her father in such a state, but she had not yet fully realized what had happened. The next day, the head of the large family went in search of the truth. He returned from school depressed and immediately asked, "Mother, pour me 100 grams, otherwise I can't vouch for myself." All serious matters. Parents always discussed without the children. But this time, the father called Kathy. The mother tried to show him with signs that he shouldn't do that. Benjamin said, "Our children can't live permanently in the cocoon of our worries. Let them get used to this life at once. Let them know that everything in this world is ruled by connections and money. The principal is basically a kind woman and a true professional, but she has a family too. As I understand it, she was put under a lot of pressure and she gave in." There was desperation and a kind of hopeless resignation in the man's voice. He took another drink, though he'd never allowed himself to do that in front of children before. "You, Kathy, forgive your father. I couldn't stand up for you. Those ghouls in expensive jackets told me directly to know my place and not to make waves. What are you doing with your pig snout, you stupid driver? Yeah, these are the times. Bras run everything now. But nothing, my daughter. There will be a holiday on our street." Kathy was used to trusting her father from childhood. She believed that for him there were no difficulties. But that night she realized that childhood was over. And Daddy was an ordinary man, not a wizard. She couldn't sleep for a long time and looked at mega things from the sky stars. The naive girl that night did not yet know that the most terrible trials were ahead of her. After that incident with the failed trip, Kathy began to categorically refuse any public errands. Stroppy pupil more than once called on the carpet to shame, but she always calmly replied that she simply did not have enough time. "Is there no one else to send but me? I'm not the only one in this school. Especially now I have to prepare hard for the entrance because my parents have no money for tutors." The defiant behavior of the graduate annoyed the teachers, but they could not do anything and soon retreated. According to the plan, after the awarding of diplomas, there were supposed to be large-scale events. Parents spent a whole year collecting money to buy a beautiful dress for their daughter's graduation party. For the celebration, it was decided to rent a banquet hall of the only decent restaurant in the city. When the father voiced the amount to be paid for the farewell to the school, Kathy objected. "Daddy, I don't want to attend this vanity parade. I'll get my diploma, and that's it." The mother tearfully began to persuade her daughter. "Kathy, daughter, think what people will say. They'll count me and my father with bills or beggars. After all, prom night is an unshakable tradition." The girl hugged her mother. "Mom, I used to think so too and dreamed of becoming a prom queen, but now I realize that I don't need it. Much more important for me now is the fact of receiving a diploma and enrollment. And then, I don't want us to spend money on absolutely unnecessary things. You'd better buy a new TV because the old one works every other day." The friends also discussed Bracker's refusal from graduation for a long time. Some thought that this decision was caused by resentment for the trip that didn't take place. Others called the medals from her uncle's gore business. Of course, the case when she was removed from the list of forum delegates on the last day became a kind of watershed, because it helped the young girl to see the world not through rose-colored glasses, but as it really is. So she said goodbye to the school. Without much regret or remorse, Kathy had long dreamed of becoming a teacher, even though her father had discouraged her. But why would you want to be a teacher? Young people today want to be lawyers or economists. You're pretty good at math. Could you go into this, like his programming? A teacher is an honorable profession, but it's not in favor nowadays. Dad, that's exactly the reason I want to go to teacher training school. You're single-handedly decided to restore the prestige of this profession. Why not? Somebody has to start a renaissance. Perhaps it's the right thing to do. Teachers, like doctors, are the future of the country. That's why I approve of your decision." There was a shortage of teachers that year, so Kathy was welcomed with open arms. The admission committee was even more pleased that the medalist dreams of entering the philological faculty. One lady enthusiastically remarked how nice it is that there are those among today's youth who are interested in the great heritage of our language. Perhaps in the foreseeable future, we will be able to regain the title of the most reading country. Kathy was not distracted by entertainment and idle conversations with fellow students. She was fully immersed in her studies, but her friends still managed to persuade her once to take part in an unusual event. "Kathy, but be a friend and help me out. You see, it's not just dancing, lessons, it's a serious event. The organizers want to do something like a 19th century New Year's Eve ball." Imagine the fantasy. Although the girl was already intrigued, noticed it well. But the format of the ball implies a certain dress code. What are we going to wear? Not in jeans. "Kathy, we're all set. We're getting costumes from the movie studio. The event will be televised, so it's in everyone's interest to make sure it goes off without a hitch. Imagine the dresses. Kathy, it's going to be quite an extravaganza, and you have to be a part of it." But not Kathy, not her friends. Couldn't even in their wildest dreams imagine what the costume designer of the country's premier movie studio was really like. They were led through a labyrinth of corridors for a long time, until finally they found themselves in front of a door with a sign, "Women's Costumes, 19th Century." Behind this door opened a center that every girl dreamed of in her heart. Such beauty and luxury in one place Kathy had never seen. A few hours of premiering and fitting outfits, and the young ladies were ready to conquer hearts. One of the girls said, "Now we can go dancing." Kathy was surprised. "But you didn't warn me that I had to learn more dances. This is a surprise. You're covered head to toe in dust. It's time to shake it off. And it's not just any ball. There will be cavaliers in uniforms and cavaliers. These are cadets from the military school. And we'll have to learn a classical ballroom dance to keep up appearances." The first master class was held within the walls of the military school. The choreographer immediately got down to business. He loudly commanded the young men, "We have time to spare, so we will work fruitfully. Now we'll pick up the ladies' dates. Then we'll learn a few basic elements. Since there's not much time for dance lessons, we'll limit ourselves to the bare minimum." It took the dance teacher no more than 5 minutes to get the two crowds of students into line. Carrie's partner was a tall, blonde man. The young man immediately suggested, "Let's get acquainted, so it will be easier for us." Ethan, Kathy. But the young people did not have time to shake hands because the dance teacher suddenly shouted right above their heads, "Talking in formation, do not get distracted. Get movement and consistency. The whole country will be looking at you. I have no intention of embarrassing myself in front of 1 million of our fellow citizens. Almost 3 days with little breaks for sleep and food." The students of 2 schools learned the waltz and the cheerful thunderclap. By evening, their feet were aching badly. Kathy, laughing, shared her experiences with Ethan. "I feel like I've run a marathon." Indeed, our preparations for the New Year's Eve ball are like a dance marathon. But I don't regret running it. Why? Ethan looked around and then whispered quietly, "Because you and I have met. I already feel like you're not a fragile, painful dance partner, but a real battle buddy." Carrie, it was interesting with Ethan. The young man shone with erudition and witty jokes, and they had no shortage of topics for conversation. After 3 days of acquaintance, Kathy had the feeling that she had known this smiling fellow for a long time. When she told him that, he laughed. "I have similar feelings. It is possible, Kathy, that we have met in a past life, so the present one should not be separated." Kathy didn't mind this suggestion because she was magnetically attracted to Ethan. A few months later, they couldn't live without each other. The 5-minute officer didn't get wise, but simply suggested it one day. "Kathy, how would you like to be my wife?" The girl also did not play the princess and immediately answered, "I look at it positively." Ethan smiled. He loved Kathy because she didn't have that nasty Mansky quality that most girls had. If that's the case, then let's bring this news down on the heads of our ancestors. Just tell me, who are we going to surprise first, yours or mine? Ethan pretended to think agonizingly. Then he got excited and shouted, "We'll flip a coin. If it comes up tails, we go to yours, and the heads will be mine." The lot chose the groom's parents, and the couple didn't hesitate to visit. Adriana pretended to be so virtuous. She glowed and raved, trying to please her guest. "Son, why didn't you tell me you weren't coming alone, but with a girlfriend?" "It's not a girlfriend. Mom and Dad, please love and welcome my future wife, Kathy. We filed the application today." Ethan's parents were now the two of them wailing their hearts out, and Michael even disappeared for a moment to pay for his ceremonial tunic. For such an occasion, I must be in full readiness. When Kathy saw the general's epaulets, she felt dizzy. She jerked sharply at Ethan's arm and whispered, "This isn't fair. Why didn't you warn me that your father was a general?" The young man, she also whispered back, "Well, first of all, generals are simple people like you and me. And secondly, my father is already retired, but he always keeps a good attitude because he wants to be an example for me. Ethan, you have great parents." The evening passed quickly, and Kathy never once felt awkward or tense. Adriana very tactfully asked the girl about her family and her studies. She was pleasantly surprised to learn that Kathy had graduated with a gold medal and would be receiving her diploma in just a month. Such coincidences happened. Ethan, too, would soon be on his way to his duty station. Michael looked pleased and emphasized that Adriana was not going alone, but with his wife. And for a young officer, the main thing is to strengthen the rear at once. I at one time missed this point, for which I received the nickname Evil Polkin. Then I was in the rank of colonel, but I did not have a wife, so I'm with this case late, counting for 2 decades years. But better late than never. Yes, I felt sorry for you, and even allowed myself to wag my finger at the general. And you'd be completely lost, my general, if it weren't for me. Kathy, you don't realize what children they are. I mean men. And even a general's epaulets don't make them serious. After all, my Michael was a street kid until he was 40. That's why I had so much to put up with him. I gave up the stage for him. I could have had a stupendous career. Adriana rolled her sweaty eyes prettily, and the general laughed heartily. My wife tells everyone that story. The reality was a little different. Her theater went bankrupt, and there was no prospect of getting a job in another. And then I came along. The girl agreed to be my wife. What struck Kathy most of all was how different Ethan's parents were. How do you get along with them? I'm sometimes surprised myself. Mom can be like that sometimes. How can I put it softer? Arrogant, or something. She often boasts about her position and isn't even embarrassed about it. You can't tell from her. Although first impressions aren't always the right ones. But your mom fascinates me. I think she feels the same way about you. To be honest, I'm surprised. I wonder why. I'll tell you, don't get jealous of me. I won't. So what's the intrigue? Mom's been looking for a bride for me for the last few months. The list included 2 daughters of her friends and even some of my father's former coworkers. Didn't you find someone worthy of the job? No, there wasn't. Because I met you before I met you. And to tell you the truth, I didn't expect my mother to welcome you so warmly. My mom's a bit of a weirdo, but she really struck a chord with me today. But Ethan didn't know his mother well. When he got home, she was waiting for him in the living room. "Mom, are you awake? What's got you so excited? How can I sleep well when my only son is getting married? You don't like my choice. I will not curve my soul, not satisfied with Kathy, of course, smart and very nice girl, but she has no breed." The young man was indignant. "Mom, will you at least out of respect for me to pick up expressions? People are not cats or dogs to choose them by pedigree. Yes, my fiancé's parents are ordinary people, but that fact is of absolutely no consequence to me. You should. An officer shouldn't have a wife from the wiretaps. The only consolation is that your Kathy's well educated. She's a teacher, after all. Otherwise, my father and I wouldn't approve of this marriage. Don't speak for me." Michael went noisily into the living room in his pajamas. "Why are you arguing in the middle of the night? Don't you have enough to talk about in the middle of the day? I'm ordering everyone to bed. Stand down." The man poured from the water and drank a whole glass. The fish didn't jump today. She must have fallen in love. If you are interested in my opinion, I am in favor of each person deciding his own life issues. Our son's old enough to be an officer, and you shouldn't impose your opinion on him, let alone choose a wife for him. Though Adriana skillfully guided her general, but there were times when she knew it was better to remain silent. This was just such a moment. Michael turned off the lights in the living room, signaling that he would not tolerate a mess in the house. My general's on a rampage. It's time for you and me to go to the barracks, son. Sergeyevich could chomp on the cheek and went to his room. A month later, the whole Daksha village was celebrating a wedding. It was summer, so the celebration was held outdoors. Kathy's mother along with Betty and the others. It was the Syrians who prepared so many treats that the table was bursting with abundance. To Ethan's surprise, Adriana too decided to join in the common cause. She put on her apron coquettishly and got busy preparing a dessert of fresh berries. She liked the process so much that she repeated it without end. She didn't even realize that cooking was such a fascinating activity. Betty supported her hostess. You'll enjoy it even more when the guests will start to take away the delicious food you've prepared. We are sure they will praise you, because indeed the dessert turned out tender and very tasty. Thank you, Betty. Now, after my son's wedding, I'll have a new hobby. But those plans were not to be. For a whole month, the newlyweds were studied because they were both taking their last credits and exams. Everyone was waiting where Ethan would be sent for further service. Kathy even packed her things little by little, but a month passed by, followed by a second one. And there was no change. There was one positive change, though. Kathy was getting ready to become a mom. This news did not make her mother-in-law happy for some reason. Adriana looked at her daughter-in-law, and through her teeth she said, strangely enough, no sooner had she cried out bitterly, and she was already in the position. Kathy tried not to dwell on the mood of her mother-in-law, who increasingly looked at her with icy eyes. Only once did she ask Ethan, your mother's not happy all the time. Should we get an apartment so we don't embarrass them? Kathy, don't be silly. In your situation, you need support, and your parents are far away. Wait a minute. What are you preparing me for? Aren't we going to your duty station together? The man realized he blurted it out and tried to remedy the situation. Kathy, I'm a military man and must be ready for any turn of events. In a word, wherever I am ordered, I will go to serve. But for now, the matter remains open. 2 days later, Ethan came home excited. We leave at 200 hours, so we must hurry up with the packing. For God's sake, don't put anything extra, or they'll throw it out at the inspection. Kathy froze in a daze, a bad feeling creeping up on her spine. Ethan, what about me? Ethan was hurriedly putting the necessary things into his backpack. He hugged his young wife tenderly. What are you all about? Everything will be fine. We'll be part of the peacekeeping force, so there's no need to worry. Adriana was no less worried than her daughter-in-law. Son, at least tell me where Mom will be. You're a general's wife, and you know very well that such questions can't be asked to the military. Yes, I know. I'm sorry, but I completely forgot about your father's status. Because right now, like hundreds of other mothers, I'm worried about my son. In just half an hour, the women had the young officer packed for the road. Ethan was in a great hurry and refused to eat lunch. He did not allow the women to see him off. For the rest of her life, Kathy remembered Ethan's smiling face and his farewell. Everything will be all right with us. I'll be back. The black limousine blinked its taillights arrogantly and quickly disappeared around the corner leading to the federal highway. Betty thoughtfully asked why a young officer who had graduated yesterday was being driven around in a limousine. It was the first time I'd ever seen such a thing. Du proudly shook Kudryashov on his head. Betty, you don't understand anything about military service. Don't forget that Ethan is a general's son. As far as I know, pedigree doesn't matter in the army. That was the case yesterday, but that's all changed today. Haven't they, Kathy? But the young woman was still staring into the darkness where the black car had disappeared. He'll come back. He promised me. Betty stirred. Adriana, I don't think your sister-in-law is all right. It's probably from worry. It's not good for her to be in such a state. God forbid it affects the child. I think it was kind of the governor to take the girl inside. Come along, my dear. You mustn't be nervous. My mother-in-law was about to join me, but then she changed her mind. She couldn't understand whether she was more concerned about her son or her daughter-in-law. Of course, Kathy herself was not the object of her attention, but she carried their grandson under her heart. On the veranda, where she was giving her spouse a cheerful meditation, Michael was there. Ethan was there. You should at least come out to see your son off. I don't like long send-offs, so I didn't show up on purpose. It's very hard for Ethan now. The first time and then this. What is it, Michael? Tell me what it's about. Don't torture me. You know everything. Don't yell. I know as much as you do. Don't forget, I've been retired a long time. It's just a hunch. But there's no other option. How about we just wait? Unexpected joy whispered fervently to Michael. I'm willing to wait months and years for my son to be okay. But Kathy, will we have her all this time? I don't get it. Is it too much of a burden for you to have your son's wife around? We just have to take care of her. In Michael's voice, there was a note that always frightened Christina, so she was silent. But in her head, under the lovely curls of her glasses, were not good thoughts. I'm not at all happy with this girl's campaign. Let her go to her relatives. There's no reason for her to give up here. The next day in the morning, while everyone in the house was asleep, dialed the number of parents of the daughter-in-law. The girl's father answered the phone. The wily mother-in-law made her voice more tragic and tearful. Benjamin, sweet Ethan is on a business trip. That's the thing. He's not going anywhere. Kathy, the poor thing is suffering. Don't take this the wrong way, but Michael and I thought it would be best in her situation to be surrounded by family. Yes, she spoke very convincingly. The girl's father listened to her carefully and promised, you should have called us earlier. By the weekend, we'll definitely be on the verge. Oh, Benjamin, it must be inconvenient for you to take the bus. Why don't we send a car or order a cab for you? You've forgotten that we have our own transportation. It's not a foreign car, but it runs well. Yes, she put the receiver down on the machine and thought about the intricacies of fate for a long time. But after talking to the saint, she calmed down. She'll go to her parents. She'll be much better off there. Who knows? Maybe she'll stay in her miserable little town. But she's no match at all. Our Ethan. In most fairy tales, the heroes get their happily ever after. In Carrie's case, fate was generous to Carrie only in the form of misfortune, since the girl's happiness was short-lived. Evil fate decided to fill her life with troubles and hardships, but Kathy did not yet know what trials awaited her. It was only a few days after Ethan's departure, and the future mother-to-be got a little used to the idea that she would have to live temporarily while waiting for her husband. On Saturday morning, there was first a quiet knock on her room. Then her mother-in-law tiptoed in. How are you feeling, honey? Thank you, Adriana. I'm fine. I slept soundly tonight. That's great. And I came to tell you Kathy jumped up in bed. Ethan's back. You should be embarrassed. No, really. He just went on a business trip. It's at least 6 months. So we have to be patient. That's not what I meant. Your parents are supposed to be here today. We've made arrangements with them. This news really pleased Kathy. In a burst of emotion, she was even embarrassed. Her mother-in-law in her arms and kissed her. Thank you. I really missed them so much, and the house too. The mood was high. She marveled at her resourcefulness and mentally repeated what a good girl she was. Bracker would take her daughter and let her stay there until the birth, and maybe even longer. But time passed, and the guests did not appear. Kathy dialed long distance several times, but the answer was a long dial tone. So she called her older sister. Alina, do you know where Mom and Dad are? We're waiting for them to visit. And her sister shouted into the phone. Don't you know yet? Kathy, Mom, and Dad. The tube fell out of the girl's hands. At that moment, a worried Betty appeared on the doorstep. "Hurry up and turn on the TV. It's terrible." Kathy recognized her father's car immediately, but the TV footage of the scary crash was pretty. Betty once resembled a pile of regimented metal. Kathy screamed, "Mommy, Daddy," and barely had time to pick up the body of the unconscious young woman. Probably should call an ambulance. In her condition, it's dangerous. After the terrible tragedy that had robbed her of both her father and mother at once, Kathy lived like a dream. She automatically performed the proper actions, but she did it indifferently. It was as if her emotions had died in her. For 2 months, she didn't go out at all, and Betty was very disturbed by her condition. She decided to talk to Adriana about her daughter-in-law's future. "Yes, I'm sorry, but I get the impression that you don't care about Kathy. You know, Betty, you're right. I just don't understand why you care so much about my sister-in-law. Maybe you have your reasons. I don't know what you're implying. I'm just saying. Oh, by the way, I was wondering if your Constantine knows Kathy. If I'm not mistaken, your son is in internal affairs in the capital, and they may have met there." That's a strange question you're asking. Unlike some people, I'm not in the habit of prying into my adult son's affairs. Adriana shook her lips, but said nothing. Another month and a half passed, and a new grief fell on the young woman's shoulders. On a Sunday afternoon, men in civilian clothes showed up, but it was not hard to tell from their posture that they were military. One man looked over the quite superior figure of his mind forward, belly forward, and invited Christina. "We need to talk to you." The woman already knew what this stern-looking man would say. She clasped her hands together in a lock so that her fingers beat. Did the man take his eyes away from her? No. More precisely, it is not yet known for sure. He's missing. There were 4 other men on patrol with him, 2 dead, 1 in intensive care, but critical condition. The survivors said they were attacked, ambushed. They're working on different versions, but nothing yet. We have to wait. Yeah, we have to wait. Adriana stared at some point in front of her, stunned like that. She had been caught by her sister-in-law after the men in black suits had left their manor. Kathy had never seen her mother-in-law like that. "Adriana, what's wrong? Don't be silent, please. Ethan, my Ethan is gone." The women sobbed and hugged each other. Then Betty joined them. And during the night, Kathy went into labor. The labor was not due for another month, so everyone was worried about the health of the baby. Betty was eager to share her knowledge. Month-to-month families survive better than month-to-month families. Boys are especially vulnerable. But God willing, they'll be fine. Nadeau kept quiet. She only called the maternity hospital once, and after that she walked around for a week as if she had water in her mouth. Betty decided to take the initiative. "Aren't you going to go and see Kathy? She probably needs to get her discharge stuff. And the baby too. And if you can't wait, you can go, but I'm not going." On the 5th day, Kathy and the baby were discharged to the happy mother. Her mother-in-law wouldn't let her in the house. Adriana's eyes burned with hatred. "This baby is not my son. I don't know, and I don't want to know who you took him out with. And now you want to force it on us." Kathy cradled the infant to his chest. She couldn't believe her ears. "Yeah, what are you talking about?" She's still asking. "I thought it was weird that you got pregnant so fast. You're the one on the side. She was out with someone else. She's using my son as a cover. Otherwise, how do you explain that an 8-month-old baby was born weighing 3,800, almost 4 kilograms? Isn't that a lot for a premature baby? And your suspicions are unfounded. Look at your grandson. He looks just like Ethan." Kathy held out a cool blue envelope to her mother-in-law, but she roughly pushed it away. "Don't try to push pity. And never admit it to be Strelchenko, and go to the place where she walked. Let them feed you there and sing Betty. Pack her things. And in 5 minutes, neither she nor her freak will be here." Kathy, hoping to find support. She looked at Michael, who was silently watching the scene. But Michael looked away. This sign spoke eloquently that he fully supported his wife. Betty took out 2 suitcases with Kathy's things and whispered quietly, "I'll walk you out." Feeding time was approaching, and the baby began to scream loudly. They threatened, "Kathy's not the ones, not the rubbers. This isn't a homeless shelter. Otherwise, I can call the police. You don't have a residency here. I'll tell them you're begging." Betty almost forced the girl off the estate. "Kathy, let's spend the night. I'll put you up with my sister. She lives nearby. And then we'll figure something out." Relatives home. The ruler turned out to be a surprisingly kind and charming woman. Betty briefly noticed Stacia is a nurse, so the baby is in good hands. The women tended to the newborn, and Kathy could not get rid of the image of her mother-in-law that haunted her. She saw the angry face of Ethan's mother and heard those hurtful words again. "Go back to where you were made that child." The worries of the past few months had completely drained the young woman. She didn't notice how she had blacked out. She was brought out of her daze by Betty's voice. "Kathy, what are you going to name the boy? Are you men?" A smile appeared on the young woman's pale face. In Christina, Ethan said if there is to be a son, name him after his grandfather. That's right, let him carry on the Jackson family line. What a little fellow, eh? He's a real big boy. Kathy went to the small sofa, whereon a white terry towel crushed the strong body of the newborn son. The baby was merrily blowing bubbles and actively moving his arms and legs. The young mom smiled through her tears. "My son, Kuroshka, you are the best baby in the world." The boy answered her in his own language. It was the first dialogue between mother and son, but it was the one that made Kathy move on. For almost a month, Kathy and her newborn son were in the care of her sisters. The young mom was gradually coming back to life, although the future seemed a blurred circulation. "Betty, thank you so much, but I can't stay dependent on you forever." "What are you thinking, Kathy? What are you gonna do with a baby in your arms now?" "I'm gonna look for a job. You'll have plenty of time to work. Let Michael grow up. You're not shy at all. And my Sam thinks my aunt and I are doing the right thing. Remember, girl, there are more good people in the world than evil." This was truly confirmed when Kathy secretly started looking for a job with Betty. Surprisingly, she quickly found an offer that suited her perfectly. A school in a provincial town outside the Urals. It required a teacher of Russian and literature. Without putting things off in a long box, she called and heard joyful, "Come. We have a critical situation, but I have an infant. Do not worry. We will provide you with housing and babysitting. It's true that the salary is very modest, but it's enough for the first time. And we'll help you. We have very kind and helpful people." Betty and her sisters saw Kathy off like family. "Where are you going in such a hurry? You should stay a little longer." We've gotten so used to Kathy. There were lots of tears and words of encouragement. And when Kathy jumped on the train, Betty asked, "Isn't there anything you want to give to your relatives?" "You know who I mean." "I do know. I've cut them out of my life forever, and I hope I never have to see them again." As the train disappeared into the distance, Betty told her sister that Adriana could expect anything. "But Michael surprised me. He could have stood up for the poor girl, but God judged them. And Michael is like his grandfather, but he didn't need his grandson. It's been over 20 years. And then I started talking about Kathy. I hadn't thought of her in years. And to be honest, Betty didn't know what to do. Sure, Sam wouldn't turn her down as she asked. But would Kathy need to? She's probably been married for a long time. It's entirely possible that she's calling someone else daddy too. And here comes Queen Adriana. How will she behave? What will she say? Betty was at a complete loss. She decided she'd wait a little longer. God willing, the old woman would change her mind. Kathy closed the magazine tiredly. What a day. Nearly half the class had started to sniffle and sneeze by the last class period. She'd heard there was a flu going around town, but she didn't believe it was that bad. And she didn't believe it when they said it was 200 hours. And here she was, right in front of her eyes. We had to call the parents to take Shmeika's group to the medic. Half of the brought worse temperature was, and at the door no office is already a line of children and other classes. The directors just grabbed their heads. And another day like this, and we have to close for quarantine. In general, I got home with only one desire: to lie down, and at least half an hour not to move. I've got a really nasty headache. Well, I don't want to collapse. Either the words were prophetic, or the disease is too strong. But tonight Kathy called the principal and told her in your voice that she had a fever. Oh, Kathy, what do we do? I realize you didn't do it on purpose. Only you're the third teacher who called me, corrects me, and as soon as she's better and goes to work. Kathy just threw herself on the pillow. How did the phone ring? Mommy, hi. Oh, it's so good to hear from you. Mommy, what's wrong with your voice? Oh, don't mind me. I'm fine. I'm just a little sick. Oh, wow. She's fine. Mommy, I'm Mommy. We'll be here tonight. Oh, Michael, Mom, you don't need anything. I'm just passing through literally 3 o'clock between planes. I got a chill in my soul. Where are you going, son? Mom, please don't worry. It's okay. But how not to worry? Her heart wanted to jump out of her chest, no matter how bad it felt. She got up and began to billet, and for her son to eat fresh, and to take with her. Ate a couple of pills. Seemed to feel a little better. She should get it all done. At 200, the doorbell rang. Michael stood on the doorstep. She rushed over to him, hugged his face, turned away. God forbid Michael get sick. And only then she saw that he wasn't alone. Behind Michael was a girl, small, skinny, really thin, braid like that. That Kathy's arm would be thinner. Mommy, I'd like you to meet her. This is my wife. Kathy almost fell over. Like a wife. Michael laughed. Mom, you look like we kept the wedding from you. We didn't. We were going to do it the way it's supposed to be done. And I got a ride from us last night before we flew out here. Jesus. Kathy hesitated for a moment, then smiled. Being a military wife is even harder than being a bride. Welcome to the family. The girl blushed and suddenly cried. Kathy looked fearfully at her son. Michael hugged his wife. Mom, she was just very worried about how you would accept her. I want her to stay here with you. She's finished her studies. She has no family. Kathy immediately remembered herself. She remembered again how she'd just been chased away from home in shame. No matter how hard she tried, she never forgot. And after all these years, she was just as hurt as before. She hugged the girl. Clara, no one will hurt you here. Come on in. I have so much to cook. I still have time to put all Vanya's things together. Mom, why? Michael looked at her in surprise. You're sick. You've been cooking all night. Kathy looked at him so much that he was immediately embarrassed. Thank you. You know how I like to eat. They settled down in the kitchen. Clara ate a little and started to peck her nose. Then she nestled on Michael's shoulder and dozed off. Mom, tell me, do you know where Dad was sent? No, son, I don't know 100%. But you're a military man. You should know there was only one hot spot back then. Kathy, frozen. What are you, Mom? What are you? These are completely different times, and I'm going to sort of maintain order. It'll be fine. I'm definitely not leaving you guys. You know, son, when Dad left, he said I'd be back for sure. He never lied to me. And I don't feel like he's gone. He's definitely out there somewhere. And I'm sure of that. Just like I'm sure that something terrible probably happened to him, and he can't come. Otherwise, he'd be here. Mom, it's been years. Let's say your gut is right, and he's alive, you know. So he has another family. Well, a man can't go that long without coming back. If he wants to come back. Michael, you just don't know Dad. You don't know how much we loved each other. Kathy suddenly smiled. I didn't get married, even though I could have. She didn't look at her mother for a while. Then shifted her gaze to Clara. I really hope that our love is no less than yours and your father's. They are. They're in charge. I have to go. I wouldn't want you to come with me to the airport. Kathy jumped up like a couple. You just got here. 3 o'clock passed us. They watched as the door closed behind you. In another situation, Kathy would have cried a tear, but now, tucked into her shoulder, she was crying. Clara. Michael. No. So Kathy is responsible for this girl. Come on, Clara. You can't worry so much. You're fine. Clara took her face away from her robe. He'll be back. Everything will be all right after all. Kathy nodded assuredly. Of course. You heard him promise. And my son has kept his word since childhood. She smiled. Once the girl had settled in a bit. A couple of days later at dinner, Kathy began to ask her where she was from and everything. I was born in a small town 100 kilometers from Moscow. My mom worked as a librarian, and my dad drove people around the villages by bus. We were never particularly rich, but we lived well. And then my dad met another woman. I was 13 then. He left us. You can't imagine how scary it is when a person you love, who you trust blindly, betrays you like that, just pushes you away and leaves. It's scary. He never came home again. Mom broke down. She started drinking. There was nothing I could do. When I was 17, her heart just gave out. My dad didn't even come to the funeral. The man was my family man. He knew how scared and hurt I was. And he didn't come. Neighbors helped. My mom's distant relative, her friend. 3 days later, my dad was killed in a car accident. I couldn't not go. I went to the cemetery. A woman rushed up to me. It was his wife. She was crying and screaming that it was my mom's and my fault. That if he hadn't been thinking about us all the time, he wouldn't have gotten drunk after my mom's funeral, which, as it turned out, she hadn't let him attend, wouldn't have gotten drunk, and wouldn't have gotten behind the wheel. That's how in 1 week I was without parents. God, that poor girl. Yeah, it's all right now. I went to school. I'm a nurse now. Which is good, because I've decided if they go anywhere else, I'm going with him. And it doesn't matter if it's a hot spot or not. I'll be useful anywhere, and he won't change my mind. Kathy smiled. She realized at once that such a conversation between the young couple had already taken place. Otherwise, she would not have heard such intonations in her voice, as if she were proving something to Michael. But she had no time to answer. The doorbell rang. Clara was frightened, and Kathy went to open the door. On the doorstep was an embarrassed William Smith. And William, come in. He entered the apartment. Hello, Kathy. I'm from the whole class. So, how's your health? He handed her a cake. Kathy almost cried. What is this? The children were collecting money to buy her a cake. William, come and have tea. The boy looked at her fearfully. It's one thing to be a messenger to hand over a cake, but it's quite another to have tea at the teacher's house. I'm it. No, you come. Sir, we have guests. The hallway came out. Hello, young man. Come in, please. While Kathy was cutting the cake, making tea, William and Clara were in the room when she came in. They were standing in front of a picture of Ethan and Kathy. Slaga turned around. That's Michael's father. Yes, that's my husband. William turned to her confusedly. The school said you didn't have a husband. He immediately slapped his lips. Kathy. She smiled sadly. As you can see, I do. Only he disappeared in the service 25 years ago. William blew the whistle even, and still no news of him. The boy was impressed, and Kathy hurried to say tea is ready. Please, everyone, to the table. As William walked to the table, his eye came across a more modern photograph. There was Michael in his military uniform. He froze, staring at the photo for a long time. Then he turned back to the table. Oh, my goodness. That's your son. You two look exactly alike. You look exactly alike. At first I thought it was just a processed photo, but I see the shape is different. William said goodbye quickly, wished him a speedy recovery, and ran away. Sarah smiled. It must be nice to be treated like that by students. Of course it is. I didn't expect it myself. Kathy, can you tell me where to go for a job? Am I good to see you off tomorrow? I have to go to the clinic to close my sick leave anyway. Michael hung up. He only got to call home once every 2 weeks, and not because it was too dangerous here. It's just that the only good communication in these parts was by wire. And to get to these very wires, you have to spend 12 o'clock. He was still smiling inwardly, and Liam, with whom they had become very good friends, clapped him on the shoulder. I see you're thinking about home. Liam, you know, I like the service, but it's very depressing without my family. I got married on the eve of my deployment. You can see how I'm drawn to my wife. Liam gloomed at Michael, asked what's wrong with you. I said something wrong. I don't even know. You see, I have my own ideas about family. I got married 3 months before my first trip here. And when I came back after a slight wound, and even at the wrong time, I found my young wife. In the bathhouse, he went dark. Are you implying something? Liam looked at him in surprise. Crazy. I'm just telling you. I'm burned out. That's why I'm sitting here. No one's waiting at home. Michael exhaled. Sorry, bro. It's okay, whatever. For a while they walked in silence through the town, which looked more like a desert village. Then Michael suddenly smiled. You know what, Liam? Let's go to my place after the service is over. We're in the Urals. To the Urals. My sister says she has so many beautiful unmarried nurses. We'll definitely find you that one unique one. I need her. They said it with conviction. Of course you do. How old are you now? 30, 29. But 30's not far off, which means that time will go even faster before you know it. And you'll be 40. And then you'll be on a well-deserved vacation. But no family, no kids, and no one is waiting for you. Liam grinned. You tell beautiful stories. Yes, I can do that. The friends laughed. Come on, think fast, or the ambulances will go home. In the evening, the chief called them to his office. All right, boys, he pulled out a map. Here's the deal. Today our workers went to this village to bring water, to see what needs to be done there. A big family lives there. I don't know how many people, but a lot of them are not very friendly. How did they know the road was going to pass them, though? They seemed to relax a little bit. Anyway, the workers said they saw a man there. Such sharks can't be bothered with the new government. And a lot of people have people like that who are considered slaves. Well, maybe not in the literal sense of the word. That is, they are not whipped or branded. Although I wouldn't be surprised at anything in this country. So this man is obviously Russian, because he understood perfectly well what our guys were saying. And he looks like a Russian, even though his beard is almost knee-high. We should go and check it out. You know, a lot of our people disappeared here back then. People are still out there. Michael said, I know. My father disappeared here. Liam looked at him in surprise. You never said anything about it. Yeah, I haven't had occasion to. Anyway, my colleagues, go tomorrow. Take some guys. Just in case. They left early in the morning. It was a decent ride, hot sandy. They took 5 men with them, and a couple of laborers who would pretend to measure something. Michael didn't sleep well that night. Didn't know why, but he got very agitated. After the evening's conversation, arrived the oldest, estimating how many of them cordially offered tea. And we will not refuse, while people are working with pleasure to sit in the days. Only now the owner considered that from the car unloaded, and the workers immediately relaxed in the bath. He grinned to himself. The cat smells whose meat it has eaten. They entered a spacious courtyard, sat down on carpets under a large awning. The master only snapped his fingers, and 2 very beautiful, swarthy girls immediately appeared and began to set the table. Liam could not take his eyes off one of them. The host noticed this and frowned. Michael shoved Liam. He seemed to wake up. They began to talk leisurely about the road, about the nature of the cat. When, as it seemed, all topics were exhausted, the one for whom, in fact, they had come appeared. The man was about 50. But that's just a rough guess. He was definitely not a local. The employee asked you cautiously. Yeah, the owner waved his hand. I bought him back about 20 years ago. They'd wanted to kill him. Well, I felt sorry for him, and I could never use a hand. We took him out, nursed him back to health. He was in such bad shape. And then when peace came, they wanted to let him go because we were animals. But we didn't know where to go. He doesn't remember anything at all. We took pity and kept him. The man dragged a huge tub of waste into the stable. Michael even thought he wouldn't have been able to lift such a vat the first time. And apparently, he's been taking full advantage of it around here. Now, maybe we should show him to the doctors. Remember something. Who needs him now? It's been years. The landlord didn't like the conversation, but Michael decided not to back down. We can talk to him. The landlord wasn't happy, but talk to him. Just keep in mind, I paid money for him. Liam grinned, and he hasn't worked it off yet. The landlord was silent, but woe didn't go to the man. The man immediately looked at the landlord, but he had to nod. He didn't really want to argue in such a situation. Hello, hello. The man smiled into his beard. It's so rare to hear my native tongue. They sat down with you. You don't remember anything. No one. You're from nowhere. There's nothing. If I remembered, I'd be sitting here. Why didn't you get help? Well, by the time you get to any point, you'll be enslaved 7 times over. You're the ones who had a successful war, and here, no order has changed. How can that be? Let us help you. Is it worth it now? He's not a bad host. I'll come and what? What do I do? Where do I go? I don't even remember the town I lived in. And my wife or girlfriend, of course, is long since married. My parents, if there were any, are probably dead by now. So there's no point in me doing anything. Do you remember having a girlfriend? No, I don't. I still have the picture. Well, part of it. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. I'll wrap it up. I must have gotten hurt. Part of the photo got ruined, but the girl stayed. Here. Michael turned pale. The man held out the photograph to him. It was really hard to see only the girl. A hole shone in the place of the man's head. But Vani couldn't help but recognize her. Exactly the same, only bigger, always stood at his mother's desk. What's the matter with you, boy? He stood up. Are you coming with us? The man looked at him fearfully, then at the master. Standing next to the master were already his 3 sons. Michael raised his gun. Liam stood between him and the family. Easy, easy. Listen, sir, if you believe me, and I can be trusted, I'll send you money for this man tomorrow. Or, if you prefer, something else. I think we can work something out. Liam came closer to the master, and they had a heated discussion. 5 minutes later, he returned. Let's go before he changes his mind. They walked quickly to the car. They tried not to turn their backs. As soon as the village disappeared in the distance, Liam turned sharply to Michael. What the hell? What the hell was that? Do you realize how it could have ended? You're not a boy, but you're acting like one. Why couldn't you inform the authorities and make everything official? Abruptly turned to the rescued and frightened man. Please give me the photograph you showed me. The man uncomplainingly held out the envelope. Michael placed the photo in the palm of his hand. You see? Well, I see it. So what? That this photo is the same one that has always been on my mom's desk all my life. Liam looked at the photo again, then at the man and whistled. So is that how you found your father, by accident or what? The man suddenly closed his eyes and so. Liam. Oh man, I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking. They stopped the car, but they couldn't bring Ethan back. So he yelled to the driver to drive straight to the hospital. An hour later, a doctor came out to see them. Well, brothers, would you know how much this man has been through? There's no room for him. And you know what's the strangest thing? Not all wounds, or rather, scars have the same statute of limitations. You'll have to heal, of course. But I'd like to talk about memory, in general with all the equipment we have. We checked his scalp on the head. All the wounds are superficial. I mean, they could have caused memory loss, sure, but it's 1 in 100. It's something else. Most likely, at some point in time, he was in so much pain, so severe, that he blacked out. But not everything is back to work. In such cases, can hypnosis, unconventional treatment, or a strong shock help? As you realize, all of these things need to be double-checked before we can talk about any treatment. I'm leaving in 2 weeks. I can pick him up. Yeah, sure. How are you doing with the paperwork? Michael sat in front of the phone for a long time, unable to figure out how to tell his mother. Liam was sitting next to him. Look, maybe I shouldn't tell you, but when you get there, it'll all make sense. Who knows, Liam, what's best? Right now, I don't understand anything myself. Did you talk to him? Yeah. He doesn't remember anything. But at least he looks human now. He shaved off his beard. Liam, what have you decided? I don't know. You've got so much on your plate. Don't make it up. It'll make me feel better. I honestly don't know how to act yet. I've spent my whole life trying to find my father. Once I found him, I was just so confused. My father's mother is my grandmother. Liam raised his eyebrows in surprise. You never said anything about that. What's there to talk about? She kicked my mother out. When she came home from the hospital, she said I was on a bender. No shit. Dad was missing by then. And anyway, the general's wife is living somewhere. But to be honest, there's a lot of summer for everyone. So maybe there's no one left. So, who are all the military men like? Well, my grandfather. I was named after him. All right, time to get ready. And Doe was looking at Cindy unhappily. But how much longer do we have? Another 40 minutes. I told you we'd be here early. God, couldn't you have picked a train so you could change trains right away? The girl smiled calmly. If I could have, I would have. Betty stroked her granddaughter's hand, as if to reassure her, but the girl calmly said, Grandma, it's okay. I knew what I was walking out on. Cindy was Sam's daughter and Betty's granddaughter. Nadeau still insisted that Betty ask her son for help. He didn't refuse, of course, but the granddaughter absolutely refused to let them go alone. I'm coming with you, and that's out of the question. That's the last thing we need. Traveling alone at that age. But you have to study, girl. It's okay. It's not like you need to get away before the session. Now, Cindy watched Adriana's caprices and didn't really understand why a woman in such a mood would go to apologize. But the closer they drove to the place, the quieter Adriana became. She almost stopped talking, swearing, staring out the window and thinking about something. Betty even began to worry about her. Then she couldn't bear to ask. And the daughter was quite ticked off, maybe. You don't need anything. Betty don't just need to think, to remember everything. It's okay. Betty once again thought to herself, that's the way you should be. But then pulled it out of herself at that age to dare to correct the mistakes of 20 years ago. Not everyone does. Already for that you can forgive some of Adriana's sins. Cindy helped Christina down to the platform, and then not. Well, yes, we'll take a cab or take public transportation. It's a pretty decent distance. Adriana, but on public transportation, baby, let those women who don't value themselves at all ride. Cindy smiled. Well, in principle, the decision is the right one. It'll be evening soon. I don't think the buses run that long here. Kathy and Clara were setting the table. They were both nervous, but Kathy was stubbornly nervous. Stabbing. Slaga even had to give her a sedative. Kathy, what's wrong with you? Michael's on his way home with a friend. It's okay though. Yes, I understand, Sarah. But I don't know, I just don't feel good, that's all. I'm the one who should be worried. What if Michael has fallen out of love with me? Kathy laughed. What are you talking about? How could Michael fall out of love with you? You're so beautiful. Kathy knew what she was talking about, was not spoiled by beauty salons and other feminine tricks. She was endowed with natural beauty, but Kathy insisted that Olya changed her hair a little, began to wear heels. At first the girl didn't seem to like it, but now her mother-in-law looked at her with pleasure and compared her with that shy girl Michael had brought. Not a drop of makeup, modest jeans, and a jacket. Naturally, the sneakers that all young people of the country are wearing now. In principle, it's the same Clara, only the hair, a little shorter and a little longer. Light, almost imperceptible makeup, a skirt just above the knee, and now an integral part of a stylish closet high heels. There's a car at the house on the signal. Oh, here we are. Clara suddenly stopped halfway to the door. Kathy laughed. Come on, Clara. Meet Dima too. During the year that Slaga lived with Kathy, they became very good friends. Kathy was not disappointed in her daughter-in-law. On the contrary, the girl reminded her very much of herself when she was young. Clara stood up for the truth, never passed by someone who needed help. So she had a young cat in the house, which the girl, risking her own life, caught on the river in Bologna. Kathy then scolded her so much not for the cat, but because she was very frightened. No cat, even the most beautiful one, is worth your life. What if you'd fallen off if you'd fallen? Would you have thought of that? Michael arrived and you didn't. Slaga smiled and remained silent. Why are you smiling? You know, Kathy, it's so nice when you fight with me. It's been a long time since anyone has been so worried about me. Kathy just flailed her arms. I mean, look at her. I'm trying to tell her that she can't do that. She's like Smith, and she's in the middle of nowhere. In fact, they both realized that swing. Ginger cat, hungry, dirty, and skinned, tied them together even more than the fact that they were now related. 2 weeks. The two of them had nursed him back to health, fed him. And now, the shaggy beauty just couldn't get out of their arms. Clara jumped outside. Kathy followed. She saw her son right away. She saw no one else but Michael, my son, and he kissed his wife soundly, throwing her a surprised look, then grabbed her and her mother in an armful and surrounded her. How have I missed you two? After a few seconds, set them on the ground. Mother Slaga, meet my comrade, this is Liam. Slaga, we have to get him married in 2 weeks. Slaga smiled. So Kathy's life has flooded everyone. Let's go inside. We've already got the table set. Everything's hot. Liam and Michael looked at each other strangely. Mom, here's the thing. There's another person coming with us. Kathy felt her legs weakening. She didn't know what was wrong. Mom, don't worry. I found Dad. Clara and Simeon picked Kathy up from both sides because she started to fall. The woman tried to pull herself together. Mommy doesn't remember anything at all. Michael opened the car door and Ethan got out. He was still thin, but clean-shaven in a suit cut. Ethan. They all heard a long, low scream. Ethan suddenly jerked as from the current he stared at her, then took a step forward. Kathy. She threw herself at him, and Ethan was already shouting across the street, Kathy is mine. Michael watched in amazement as his father wrapped his arms around his mother and pulled her against him. Liam muttered, here comes the stress. You think he remembered everyone? He sure did. Look at him. 10 minutes, if not more. Kathy and Ethan stood there with their arms around each other. No one was in their way. What's 10 minutes? Compared to the time they hadn't seen each other. Finally, Kathy pulled away. Ethan, if you only knew how much I've been waiting for you. I didn't believe for a minute that you were dead. Kathy, if it hadn't been for Michael, he killed his son. Wow, I have a grown-up military son that you, Kathy, raised alone. Tears ran down Ethan's cheeks. Why are you here so far from Moscow? Kathy didn't have time to answer. Hello, please tell me if Kathy Jackson lives here. A cab car stopped near them, and a beautiful dark-haired girl got out. She was holding a notebook. Yes. Kathy looked at her in surprise. I'm sorry. Who are you? Adriana got out of the car. It was obvious that the woman had been napping on the road, and now she was squinting in the sun, trying to get a good look at everyone on the street. Yes, that's exactly who Kathy didn't expect to see here. So many kilometers away from Moscow, Betty got out of the car. Kathy looked at her mother-in-law in silence. "Kathy, I came to see you because I couldn't live with myself. I thought I could die in peace, but I couldn't. I was tormented by conscience and longing. I came here to apologize. I realize that it's not my forgiveness, that such things are not forgiven. But forgive me, I've been very nasty. It only seems that I don't care. I should have fallen at your feet a long time ago. I was so ashamed I wanted to die. And now I realize that the grave sin is not for us." The old woman knelt down. Michael and Kathy rushed to her. They lifted her up. Betty was crying. That's the kind of companion she was. She had certainly never seen one. Cindy, too, was flapping her long eyelashes in surprise. During the journey, she had already gotten used to the fact that the characters, and in general the nature of the old lady was so. Adriana's mother froze. She could already hear Ethan's voice. Tears made it hard to get a good look at her. Not Kathy, not her grandson. "Mommy, hello." And then the woman saw. "Ethan, my son. We had to call an ambulance after all." Adriana, I felt so bad that she fainted, and she immediately said it was real. The doctor made an appointment, said the woman was strong, just overexcited. Everyone forgot about the table. Kathy and Ethan sat by Adriana's bedside, and she kept talking in low voices and holding her hand, Kathy and Ethan at times. Betty dozed quietly on the couch. Michael, Liam, Clara, and Cindy were sitting on a bench in the yard. Liam sighed. "Look, I never thought in my life that I'd be a part of such a family history. In fact, I always thought it could only happen on TV." Cindy smiled. "That's for sure." Michael, his wife, and said, "You know what, Liam? I think I'll take time out and listen here. My wife is a young mom, now a dad and grandma too." Liam gave him a quick glance. "You'll take it up with Mom, of course, but she's already had hers. Is it possible to hold a grudge for so long?" "You're probably right. Here we'll have 2 children at once." "Clara." The woman pressed herself against him harder instead of answering. Liam sighed. "I envy you, brother," with white envy. "I won't have such a scenario." Cindy immediately asked, "Aren't you 2 married?" And they looked at each other. But then Kathy and Ethan came outside. I was amazed at how much my mother had changed, and my father's eyes were shining. "Well, has everybody gone into hiding? We shouldn't have saved so much salt." Everybody to the table. Liam immediately gave his elbow to Cindy. "May I escort you to the table?" Cindy jokingly curtsied and put her hand on Liam's arm. Later, when it was time to put everyone to bed, Liam whispered to Michael, "Something tells me that I won't be in a hurry to sign a new contract this time either." Adriana managed to convince everyone that they would be better off in Moscow. There's plenty of room for everyone. Ethan needs a checkup. Young people need to live. There are more opportunities there. I'll be happy. If you're around every day, I'll ask for forgiveness. Kathy looked at Ethan, at Michael. But it's for the men to decide in any case. In 3 weeks, the whole big company was leaving for Moscow. Kathy was reduced to sobbing. Her students, led by William Smith, came to the station to see her off. They even brought flowers, which made Kathy's tears flow. Liam, too, was traveling with them. Just yesterday, he had made Cindy an offer she could not refuse, namely to marry him. Betty imagined the shocker Sam would be in when he was informed. The train moved. Everyone stared out the window in inertia. Everyone was thinking about something else, but no one else in the company had any sad thoughts. Ethan hugged Kathy. "I told you I'd be back."